Hi, welcome to Lisa's Study Guides. My name is Lisa if you don't know it already, and today we're talking about reckoning and the namesake. So I'm going to go through the background and some common themes, but at the very end I'm going to tell you some tips on how to really appreciate these books for what they are, to get into it so that you can be able to write it on your best level, you know? So yeah, let's just get started with some background knowledge. Magda Szubanski's memoir, Reckoning, explores the question, who are we? How do we define ourselves? How do we come to terms with ourselves? Magda's story begins with an endearing passage about her father, and in doing so, Magda sets up the importance of family in shaping our sense of self for the remainder of the book. You may have heard of a quarter-life crisis or midlife crisis, when people just aren't sure of who they are and what they're doing in life. And Magda's memoir shows us how none of us are alone in our search for our identity. She struggles to find her sense of self as an Australian, compounded with the confusion of whether she had a Scottish Pole or Polish Scot background, all the while repressing her sexuality and trying to find a meaningful career. The Namesake also shares similar themes in that it explores how we discover ourselves. Being born in the United States, Gogol just wants to dissociate himself from his Bengalese background. His name Gogol is a constant reminder of his struggle with his place, for it is neither a Bengalese nor American name. He responds to this uncertainty by assimilating into American culture. He only uses his name Nikhil in public. He dates an American girl, Maxine, and spends long periods with her family. It is only when his father passes away that Gogol begins to appreciate and accept his family's tradition and culture, even to the extent that he agrees to meet Moshumi, a Bengalese girl recommended by his mother. Eventually they marry, though by the end of the novel, her extramarital affairs leads to their divorce. This is not all in vain, however, because the Gogol we see is one who has finally come to accept his name and is at peace with who he is by the end of the novel. Common themes. Search for our sense of self. Both texts focus heavily on their protagonist's personal experiences and discovery of who they are. Magda is at a crossroads with multiple identities. I was a convent girl during the week and a pretend Sharpie on the weekends. And I wasn't the only one who hated lesbians, despite being one herself. As a result, her confusion and refusal to accept her identity meant that I cemented my soul to a false self. It wasn't that I lied, I became a lie. Acceptance is shown to be a major milestone for humans to come to terms with who they are, and to reject this is to only cause further inner turmoil. For Gogol in The Namesake, his rejection of his name and moving out of home doesn't cause the same amount of confusion for him as it does for Magda, because he is physically and consequently mentally removed from his Indian roots. However, he does feel the emptiness in his actions. Gogol Ganguly will, once and for all, cease to exist. Yet the thought of this eventual demise provides no sense of victory, no solace. It provides no solace at all. He tries to find his sense of self through Maxine and her family, but it's his father's death which acts as a catalyst for Gogol to gravitate towards his Indian heritage as a way to find himself. Lahiri explores how revisiting our past is necessary to understand our present self, and this is eloquently depicted as Gogol reaches out for the overcoat and namesake at the end of the novel. Assimilation. Assimilation means to integrate yourself with a local culture, customs, and conventions. After arriving in Australia, the Szubanskis knew nothing of sensible precautions, shaking out your shoes in case of spiders, making loud noise in long grass in the case of snakes, lifting the toilet seat to check for redbacks. As a result, they had to grapple with this new reality. However, it was a challenge welcomed for the Szubanskis. In fact, assimilation is a means for Magda's family to forget the past. As described, my father was rushing in the Australian direction, assimilating at a rate of knots. For her father, to assimilate meant to dispose of his previous identity and to build a new sense of self. However, in The Namesake, Gogol's mother, Ashima, is reluctant to assimilate with American culture. She upholds tradition by continuing to wear Bengalese clothes and holds Bengali feasts for their Bengalese family and friends. Lahiri shows us how some individuals maintain their sense of self by refusing to assimilate with their local environment. Reconciliation of the past. Both texts deal with death and, coincidentally, the death of the protagonist's fathers. Reckoning is largely a reconciliation with Zbignev's past, and we see how important this is for Magda because learning more about him would in turn teach her more about herself. For me, the key lies buried in the past. The only way forward is back. While Gogol initially disregards the story behind his namesake, his eventual desire to read the overcoat is a way for Gogol to reconcile his name and the heritage he had buried. So you'll notice how all these themes sort of overlap with one another because they're all actually falling under the overarching theme of identity. And this is perfectly okay, and I find that this is going to be the case with a lot of themes that you explore. Obviously, ideas themselves don't just exist in a singular sense, but often they kind of compound one another and interrelate in different ways. So don't be afraid when you're talking about certain themes to latch onto other themes in your exploration. Obviously, there's a lot more with these texts that I could cover, and so this is really just a beginning. And I mainly spent time talking about the protagonists of these two texts. So I'd really love it if in the comment section below, if you'd be able to add some constructive information to what I've discussed. So let's elaborate on this discussion and tell me more of your thoughts. What are some other characters we could maybe talk about? And so what do they say about humans and how we behave and respond to certain situations? I always read my comments, so if you do write something constructive about the book, then it's highly likely that I'll respond to you and give you my feedback as well. Now, to finish off, I want to give you a tip on how you can study these two texts. I think that with all English texts, the more you can get yourself into the text and relate to it on some level, the better that's going to be for your understanding of the text and therefore your actual writing when it comes to Saxon exams. So, you know, the search for identity and our sense of self is something that is universal. Everybody goes through it, whether it's like your background, your culture, your sexuality, where you live in, you know, who your friends should be, what hobbies you have. These are all things that we grow up with and that can confuse us and cause inner conflict within us and take us a long time to really be able to understand and be comfortable with our sense of self. So I think if you can think to your own personal experiences, then that's a really good way for you to be able to connect to these texts. I know for me, the reason why I particularly enjoyed The Reckoning was because Magda's a first-generation Australian, just as I am. And I think growing up for me, I was really confused with my identity as well. I knew that I was very much Australian. You know, I grew up here. I know all the streets, all the suburbs. I have a very strong Australian accent. But my heritage really confused me because we would speak Cantonese as a first language at home, but then my parents would speak Vietnamese to each other. We'd eat Chinese or like mainland Chinese food at home, and then also eat Vietnamese and Cambodian on other occasions. So it took me a really long time to kind of understand who I am, and it wasn't until I'd say really recently, let's say in the past 2-3 years, that I've been like, okay, I know who I am. Yes, my last name is Tran, but I know that my heritage is Chinese, and when my parents moved to Vietnam, they had to change their name because of the war. So that's why culturally we have family that speak Vietnamese. We eat Vietnamese food at home, but that's why we also eat Chinese food and also Cambodian food, because my parents lived and were initially born in Cambodia. So it's super confusing, but I think that, you know, you really do develop this sense of peace and this inner strength within you once you come to terms with who you are. And if you're somebody who doesn't feel like you've really experienced any doubt with who you are, look at the people around you. Look at all the stories that are out there, film, books that are about these topics, because I'm sure that on some level you'll be able to find a way to connect. So I hope that's helpful for you guys. If you do find it helpful, then feel free to subscribe to my mailing list just down in the description box below. Every single week I send out new updates and tips to students like you. So yeah, jump on board, it's completely free, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!